You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is BRFM 95.6, the Isle of Sheppey's very own local community radio station. Now it's time to hear the interview I did earlier on the telephone with Brian Daniels. He's from the Citizen Commission on Human Rights. This is what he had to say when I spoke to him. So we're now joined with Brian Daniels, and he's from the Citizen Commissioning on Human Rights. Firstly, welcome along to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Daniel. That's very kind.
Now, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Well, let's start with who we are, and that is the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And what it is, it's an international mental health watchdog, and it's been around for 44 years. It was established by members of the Church of Scientology and a professor of psychiatrist called Dr. Thomas Zaz. And that was in 1969 when people didn't really have a voice. In fact, you know, when you look at it today in contemporary psychiatry, people don't necessarily have a voice. But we at CCHR, we give those people a voice. We listen to what it is that's going on within the psychiatric environment and document abuses that are going on. That's our primary function, as well as looking at trends across, if you like, national trends that show how many drugs are being prescribed, how much ECT is being used, the cost to the taxpayer of these specific activities. And then basically what we want to do is tell people about this because they don't know.
Now, I know you wanted to cover, and I was wondering if you can tell listeners what ADHD is. ADHD
is a disorder of childhood or adolescence. That's what psychiatrists call it. It stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And it's something that is being diagnosed in children, adolescents, and even adults now. The problem with ADHD is that there is no scientific basis that supports the existence of this so-called disorder. What it was, in 1987, the American Psychiatric Association, at a conference, literally voted it into existence. It was a show of hands, in other words, consensus, that brought this particular disorder into existence. There are no tests, there's no biopsies, there's no x-rays, there's no blood tests, urine tests to support the existence of ADHD, but lots of children and adolescents are being given stimulant drugs. Drugs like, you know, your listeners may have heard of Ritalin, but there's other ones like Concerta and Equazim. These are, again, stimulant drugs, and since the year 2000, the amount of money spent on ADHD drugs in England alone was 438 million. Now, that's an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. But it's for something that doesn't exist. It's a great. I call it the contemporary emperor's new clothes. We all think it's, you know, there it is. You know, yes, this child's got ADHD, but you can't see it.
Now, I know you also wanted to go on, I assume this carries on with this, is children's being labelled, and also go on to talk about drugging for profit.
Right. Let me take up the labelling aspect, because there's a book called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise known as the DSM, and there's some disorders in there which just defy logic. Again, your listeners may not have heard of these, but I'm just going to give you three. And one of them is called reading disorder. One of them is called mathematics disorder.
Right.
And another is called disorder of written expression. In other words, you take that down to your everyday language. You've got the three R's, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, which have been categorized as mental disorders. And obviously there's going to be criteria that say this is how you would diagnose it if somebody was having problems. But you can't, you know, reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's what we go to school to learn. They're not mental disorders. And it goes along with ADHD. it's a set of behavioral and emotional characteristics that have been kind of lumped together, put into a pot, and then some so-called expert has said, yes, this is definitely a disorder, but it's only an opinion. And this is the crux of psychiatry. It is based on opinions. It's not based on scientific medical fact. Whereas you can see, let's say, a tumor under a microscope, you're never going to see ADHD under a microscope. Even though psychiatrists will tell you, or your parent, if you're a child, that you have a chemical imbalance of the brain, you can't prove it. There's nothing to prove it at all. And last year, by the way, £52 million was spent on ADHD drugs in England. £52 million. That's a lot of money for not very much return.
So I know you next wanted to cover elderly drugging and also go on to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. Again, from the cradle to the grave, psychiatry doesn't miss out anything. Even the elderly are being targeted by psychiatrists. One of the things that came out about 2 years ago, and it's been under government investigation since then, is that the elderly in care homes who were suffering with dementia were being prescribed antipsychotic drugs. These are drugs normally reserved for people suffering psychosis or schizophrenia or so-called schizophrenia. Elderly patients who were in their twilight years were being diagnosed with dementia and being given antipsychotic drugs. What the government report found out was that at least 1,800 elderly patients a year were dying as a result of this. Now, when people go to psychiatry, I presume they go in the hope that they'll be helped rather than you end up dying. And that brings me on to the point of a lot of these drugs, psychiatric drugs, they have been given international drug regulatory warnings. For example, antidepressants, which again are used on the elderly. They have warnings that have been issued all over the world. Many of the antidepressants have warnings saying that they cause aggression, violence, even suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and obviously some people do actually go ahead and commit that. Again, we're talking about a so-called profession that is supposed to have results, but then when you look at the results of psychiatry, they're not very good. I would even go so far as to say that psychiatry is probably the only profession which, if it actually cured anyone, it will go out of business. There's no results.
This is the Monday Night Community Show with me, Daniel, right here at BRFM. We are at the moment hearing the telephone interview I did earlier on with Brian Daniels. He's from the Citizen Commission on Human Rights. So what is ECT? And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that, I understand.
ECT, otherwise known as electroconvulsive therapy. I think therapy is a misnomer. I can't imagine anyone, when it used to be delivered a few years ago, you'd see people breaking their backs with the convulsions, or they'd be breaking their teeth as they bit so hard, because it's an electrical charge going through the body which creates a convulsion. The so-called medical settings, the anesthetics, the white coats, kind of cloak it in this medical legitimacy, whereas in actuality, today's ECT that is delivered, the only difference between it and what we saw 20, 30 years ago is the fact that it's easier for the witness. For the patient receiving it, the side effects and the effects are still as damning. There's brain damage. There is loss of memory, whether short-term or long-term. There's all sorts of other physical damage that is going on, yet it's claimed to be therapeutic. There's nothing therapeutic about it. It's something more likely you'd find in a KGB interrogator's arsenal. It's not something that is therapeutic. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No, I've never seen it, but it does seem an old-fashioned thing or something from the past. I must admit.
It claims to be old-fashioned. That's right, but it's still going on today. New ECT suites are actually being built. Yet there are studies which claim there's nothing therapeutic about this idea of passing electricity through a person's brain. In fact, it was first conceived, if you like, in 1938 by a psychiatrist who was in a Rome slaughterhouse. And what he saw was pigs who were going to be slaughtered. They were given an electrical voltage or an electrical shock prior to going into the slaughterhouse, which made them more docile. And it was deemed that, obviously it has some kind of, it produces, if a person was having a psychotic episode and you gave some kind of electricity, I presume they're looking at that and going, well, actually that might work for the individual. All it does, it just suppresses the individual into submission. And quite often you get these reports that, ECT definitely worked and the person's no longer having a problem. I'd even contend that the person was probably scared by having this kind of barbaric, torturous treatment, and therefore says, I'm not going anywhere near that again. So to call it therapeutic is a complete misnomer, and quite frankly, it's false.
Now, I know you next wanted to go on to talk about psychiatry driven by profit, Brian.
When you look at what psychiatry is all about, realize one thing. By their own admission, psychiatrists don't have any cures for their patients. The fact that they don't have cures is sort of bad enough. It's somewhat of an indictment. But the fact that they're actually charging huge amounts of money to taxpayers to drug individuals is inconceivable. I'm a taxpayer, and I was looking at some figures from the Department of Health. Now, in the year 2010 to 2011, £11.9 billion was spent on mental health disorders. That's a huge slice of the NHS budget. Now, there's no other category that gets more than that. Like cardiovascular problems, heart problems, which is we hear as the biggest problem in medicine in this country. That gets less than mental health disorders. It gets, even cancers and tumours, they get less than mental health disorders. So £11.9 billion for no cures, for no results, it's a modern day, you could call it a fraud. Fraud is where you get something for nothing. The patients themselves who actually go and experience these treatments, some of them, they say, well, it did this for me. Well, all right. But did it actually cure the person? And we find so many times somebody says, oh, yeah, I'm much better, but are you still on the drugs? Yes. Well, okay, are you going to ever come off of them? Well, the psychiatrist said no. So you're left in a situation where it's a merry-go-round. And that is, let's face it, that's good business. If you can keep a person on a drug for the rest of their life because there is no cure, yet the drug is supposedly doing something for them, that's tremendous business because you're selling your product week in, week out, and you're guaranteed revenue. That's good business, but that's extremely bad medicine.
So your aim is to give people the opportunity to be aware of some of these potential problems that we've discussed today?
Our aim is to inform.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, informed consent or informed choice, that's a fully informed choice, must be the end result of any type of medical or psychiatric treatment. I do differentiate because medicine deals with real, observable diseases, where psychiatry deals with opinions about a person's behavior. But the important thing is that we can inform people so that then they can make a fully informed choice rather than whatever it is they may be told. Because a lot of the information that they're given is selective. It doesn't cover everything. And yes, the psychiatrist may say, read the patient information leaflet. Well, okay, but I don't know if you've ever seen one, but it's pretty small. It's very small writing, and there's a lot of information in there that may not necessarily be aimed at you or I. It's aimed at doctors, with all their particular words in the medical field. So it's important that people are fully informed. And, I do wonder what would happen if people really knew the effects of these drugs. Would they actually take them? But the only way we can really find out is to make sure they are fully informed. And having the opportunity to speak here, it reaches more people. Other people are then able to hear what we have to say, and they can also make up their own minds because they have both sides of the story.
So if our listeners would like to find out more about your organisation, do you have a website or a way of contacting you?
We do. We have a website, and it is at www.cchr.org.uk, and you can email us on, very simple, it's info, I-N-F-O, at cchr.org.uk, or listeners can call us on 01342 313 926. Equally, you can write to us, and the address is on the website.
Well, Brian, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along and telling our listeners a little bit more about what you do.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Daniel.